So in this video, we'll be running through each chapter and just running through what the connection between the survivor and the killer is. Now, we'll preface this by saying I won't be focusing on any original characters or killers. Those weren't linked with chapters and not necessarily connected with anybody. I also won't be focusing on any licensed characters. This goes for Lori, Myers, Demo, Steve, and Nancy, and all the rest. Typically because their connections are rather, well, self-explanatory. It's kind of easy to know how Demogorgon connects with Steve and Nancy, how Lori connects with Myers. You don't really need me to go on a whole long-winded rant. As much as I think you guys enjoy my smooth, buttery voice, I don't think you need to have that. So, the criteria will be, they have to be a DLC character, and they have to be an original chapter. So, we'll be running through The Last Breath, Flesh and Mud, Sparks of Madness, Lullaby in the Dark, Curtain Call, Shattered Bloodlines, Darkness Among Us, Demise of the Faithful, Cursed Legacy, and Chains of Hate. So, let's get ready, pull up your socks, and sit down as we dive into the fog and dive into just how the survivors and the killers are connected, whether it be through story or theme. I hope these connections aren't wearing down too much on you, because when we all look inside, we'll all find the darkness among us. In this section, we'll be talking about Jeff Johansson and the Legion, or Julie Konsenko, Frank Morrison, Joey, and Susie. Now, out of all the connections, this is the most concrete and the most established. I don't really have to go too in-depth into this, but let's start with a little summary of the characters. Jeff, being a sheltered and shy man, lived his life with a passion for art. Eventually, after complications with his family, he moved from Ormond, and years later came back. Deciding to come back to a special place, he was taken by the entity and snatched away. Now, speaking of this special place, let's talk about the hideout of the Legion. After 3 kids met Frank Morrison, they began to form a gang of twisted dares and crimes. This gang was known as the Legion. Under the watchful eye of Frank Morrison, Julie Konsenko, Joey, and Susie all became brutal criminals and formed a gang known as the Legion. But any Legion needs a symbol, and with their masks and their face, they also needed a mural, a band name, something to post on their hideout. That came to a head when Frank noticed a sketchbook of one Jeff Johansson. Looking through it, he saw that Jeff was the perfect candidate to do the commission of the Legion. After the day's work, Jeff was compensated by Frank. What did Jeff do, you ask? Jeff was hired to adorn the Legion's hideout, the abandoned Ormond Resort, with a mural that showed the Legion. These killers and survivors are connected by a fateful encounter, one where they did a job for the other and the other paid them. These are the only killers/survivors we know so far that have actually interacted with each other. Their connection is pretty self-explanatory. Meeting each other talking to each other, and even paying for services. Quite the connection indeed. For those who lack faith, there is nothing else left but demise. Here we'll be talking about Adiris, the Plague, and Jane Romero. Plague, better known as the Priestess of Babylon, was a woman who dealt with the obvious titular plague, trying to protect those who followed her and those who worshipped and were faithful from this curse that ravaged their lands. She sacrificed a lot, even her own toes, her body, and many more. Eventually, knowing that there was nothing left, her community pillaged somewhere else. In a cave, they realized that they were sick, dying, and this was the end. In one ditch attempt, Adiris made one final plea, one final prayer, and a god answered it. But not the god that you and I would want. This god, this eldritch abomination, is our favorite entity. And it sold her to serve it in sacrificing the survivors. But now we have Jane Romero, an inspirational talk show host who was dealt bad hand, dealing with forced stereotypes of her heritage. She eventually grew out of it and became a figure that touched hearts, that showed inspirational tales and made people stand up and unite together. For the inspirational theme and the link between these are evident. Both were inspirational women who amassed a following of people who believed in them, believed in the messages they taught, whether it be how to survive a plague and the curse that was ravaging them, or believed in her messages of believing in oneself and rising above one's hardships. These two people are linked and connected by inspiration. Even though inspiration can be a powerful thing, the legacy we leave behind can be just as important, no matter how cursed it is. We'll be talking in this segment about the Oni, or Kuzen Yamaoka, and Yui Kimura, the motorcycle extraordinaire. What to say about this girl? Brought up with tradition, but decided to rebel against it, decided to follow her own pursuits. She stuck to her conviction and became a motorcycle legend, a champion of races that had her own group, those who saw her as an inspiration and followed her. Even with the hardships that failed her, a stalker, an attacker, and accidents that would normally put others at an ending of career, Yui continued on further, continued to inspire and set out a cause for all those who follow in her wake. Yui's legacy was the connection she gave to people, the group she left behind, and the work she did to protect all those who had suffered from abuse and assault. From a pure legacy, we come to one of hatred and hubris. Kuzen Yamaoka, or the Oni, felt that his bloodline was the true heir to samurais. Those who also fought, those farmers who picked up arms to help defend their country, were imposters in his mind, as they didn't share the true bloodline. This angered him, to which he hunted them down, brutally murdering them, and any who sought to supply these false imposters. Eventually, he began to be called a demon, and even that too he took as an insult, murdering all those in his wake, even his own father by accident. Eventually, he hunted down the person who called him a demon, which led to his demise by the townspeople, avenging the person who died. Now, how do these guys connect, you ask? Well, it's very simple. They connect in their conviction and their determination in their ideals. Whether it be pure ideals like Yui's determination to fight for what she believed in and to fight for women's rights, or whether it be the ideals corrupted and cursed, like Kuzan, who believed that his bloodline was pure and all those who came before them weren't worthy. Whether the conviction is pure or corrupt and cursed, conviction still links these two together. Let's move on from that, as talk of such legacies can only chain us in hate. With this, we'd be talking about the Deathslinger, aka Caleb Quinn, and Zarina Kassir, the survivor of this chapter. Zarina, a Lebanese filmmaker, dealt with discrimination because of her background and her heritage, eventually growing past it, becoming quite the successful film director, making films to send a message and change the world. After an incident with her father getting killed, she pursued the perpetrator, eventually getting a confession out of him and shedding light on all his crimes. But in doing so, she also learnt of other cases, of a massacre at the Hellshire Penitentiary. She delved in there, finding an abandoned wing and a cell. Upon searching around, she found the remnants of a disturbed man's old place. Eventually, the fog claimed her. Now, let's move on to Caleb Quinn, or the Deathslinger. Just like Zarina, he too was mocked and persecuted for his heritage. But he, just like her, moved on from it. But instead of becoming a film director, he became an inventor, creating ingenious inventions. But eventually, he was betrayed, backstabbed by those who he worked for, and hungered for revenge. His first attempts of revenge landed him in no good respite, in jail, locked away. He was eventually given an offer he can't refuse: fill the prison and get a true chance at revenge. But in doing so, he was betrayed once again and went on a massacre with his crew. Going back to his old cell, he sat there, looking at all he had left behind before the entity came a-knocking. These two, like with Nia and Sally Smithson, are linked by area. Linked by an area they were before they were taken, Hellshire Penitentiary. But they're also linked by another feature: the discrimination they faced for their heritage, and the fact that both of them moved among it. One turning into a force of good, and the other into a vengeful and brutal bounty hunter. Honestly, it was a little shaky. This has been the first, let's say, big project I've done since the whole lockdown and all that kind of restricted me from my equipment. But it was nice to go back to a decent project. I'd love to know how you guys liked it and enjoyed it, and how you guys are liking the lore files so far, well as the fog dives. Now, I leave you guys to what you guys do, and I bid you guys the best in the fog, to survivors and killers.